Alright, Sinners, welcome to another Simple Needs tutorial video. This is going to be on the new Pandemonium Horns that I should be packaging today. Getting them in the store. I know I've been teasing you guys with images for a little while now as I hammered through all the coding so that I could offer you the most customizable attachments I've ever offered. I think you're going to enjoy them. I hope you do anyway. This is what the new HUD looks like. Right here in the display area, let me go ahead and use one of these buttons right away. This is your pose button so that you can make your avatar hold still while you get your fitting done. And so you can do your customization without trying to chase your Abby all over the place with a cam. It's also convenient in that you don't have to have a pose stand. So that's going to be included in everything from here on out. You see here that you can see the actual horns. These horns fit really well in this window. It is possible that I may have to break up future horns to get them to all fit in the display area, but I like the direct, what you see is what you get interface, because it makes it really easy to identify what you're changing. So I'm going to try and maintain this here on out. Now obviously, because all these little bits of decor that you see back here, some of them are behind the horns and you can't see them from this angle, which is what this change view is all about. So you can view from the back and then from the inside and then from the front and then back to the outside, and that'll give you access to everything from every angle. Because of the way that I have some things set up, it really doesn't matter that while you can't see the gemstone from this angle, you can still change it while you have the jewels active, but I'll cover that in a minute. So this is our display area. Up here in the top you can see that we can reset this display. Basically what this does is it makes everything visible again, because you can toggle stuff off just like you could on the horn side. You set your active surface and you click on it and hold, and you'll see it ghosts out, and that means it's hidden. If I wanted to just reset the display because I made changes to another copy of the horns and I don't have to re-show them all one by one. I could do it all with one click here by resetting the display. I don't need to do that, so I might show you something else with that a little later on. What this option sync warn does is when you reset the display, it will also communicate all of those changes to the horns. So as you re-show everything on the display, it would re-show everything on the horns as well. Something that's worth noting when you do the reset display is that it uses all of the active textures that you have selected on these surface panels. And then it also uses the materials that you have set for each surface. So you could, if you wanted to, mess around and make changes in here and then click reset display and sync warn and have it change everything on the horns all at once, but you know, it's not really a lot of fun to guess at your changes without applying them to see how they work. This apply to all button in the display area. As you might guess, when you start changing metals, having to click every single item to change them, if you want to make everything all one color, that's kind of a drag since there are so many. So what you can do is you can just click apply to all, and it runs through the entire inventory on the horns, finds all the faces it needs to change, and changes them all. And you heard all that beeping. The reason that I have the HUD doing that beeping is so that you know that it is actually busy doing something. You might notice if you were looking over at the horns that the horns in your head do take slightly longer to finish changing than the HUD does, but they do finish. So if you just give them that second or two to catch up, they'll finish. It's just that as it's changing all these metals, at one point it's changing stuff on the back that you can't see before it flips it back over to the front and changes the last couple of metals on this side. And it is worth noting that you can change almost everything independently. I can change each one of these rings to a different metal color if I want. And each one can have their own setting. I can also change these little gauges that are punched through the horns that the rings run through independently. All of the gem settings are independent, so you can change those all one at a time. Even on these chains, each of the 4 chain links are independent. And on the back of the horns here, you can see these open rings with the ball on either end. These are where the chains loop up to on the back of the horn. Well, in these, actually, you can even change the ball to one color, and you can change the ring to another. And as you can see with me flailing about here a little bit, some of these parts are small and they're kind of hard to change independently, which is another reason I added the apply to all. So if you want to change everything, you don't have to fight with clicking, all these different faces, because there are over 60 faces on this set of horns, counting both sides. Now the HUD does have a resize on it. You can only go so big though before it's trying to run off the screen, and that's not especially helpful. So let's get this back where it goes. And let's get all my metals one color again before I move on to some of the other stuff here. But you listen to every one of those beeps. Every one of those beeps is a surface that's being changed, and so you can tell there's a lot of different ways you can customize these things. Now on these surface panels, the surface section is the next section that's important. You can only change the surface that's active. So I could click all day long on the horns and the ribbons, and you're not going to see anything change while I have metals active. Now I did code this so that if you misclick, like if you have this set to metals and you click on a gem, it will change the gem setting. That's just to make things a little easy, because like right here, if you wanted to change this one to gold, and it would be really hard to click around the outer edge. Obviously you could change the view like I showed, or you could just go ahead and click the gem and it'll change the related gem setting. That's actually the same on the jewels. So like this gem setting down here, I can't really see it, but if I wanted to make it this light blue, I could click on the setting, and you may or may not be able to tell from your view that that little gem did actually just change to blue. So hopefully that'll make that stuff a little bit simpler. On the ribbons here, if you set the ribbons and you hide the ribbon, it will also hide this little metal ferrule that is a ribbon gather there on the front of the ribbons. Likewise, if you're on metals and you hide that little ferrule, it will hide the ribbon, because those two items are linked together. The ribbon looks stupid without the ferrule, and the ferrule's just floating there without the ribbon. So now something else that's directly related to this is that if I say change the metal over here to gold, and then I go to ribbons and I turn that ribbon off, you see all it did was just make it invisible. It didn't change the gold texture. But if I turn the ribbon back on, it knows that I have the gold active on the metal, so when it turns it back on, it uses that metal setting. Likewise, if you had other material settings going on down here, and they are different from each surface, like if I made the metal all black, here you see the RGB went to black there. When I go to jewels, it's not black. That's because the jewels RGB has its own setting, as does the ribbons. But again, if I were to hide the ribbon and then re-show it, it knows that the metal RGB is set to black, even though it didn't display it here. That can be important, because if you were to go to your gemstones and make them all different colors, and then hide all the jewelry, like if you were to hide a chain, when you hide a chain, since there's no place for those gemstones to hang anymore, it hides all those gems as well. Well, if they were blue, green, purple, and orange when you hit them, when you reshow them, it's just going to use what the active gemstone texture is, which right now is still set to the default red. So keep that kind of stuff in mind when you're making changes. If you make a lot of big complex combination changes and do all kinds of rainbow stuff with your horns, which you can do, and I'll show you right here, we got the rainbow ribbons. You're going to want to make sure you change things individually, not use, you know, the apply to all or the hide stuff and reshow it all at once. And just to make sure that I did cover it, you can click on the apply to all button even if there's only a single face, like there was with these ribbons. You know, because that might be easier to click than the ribbon, which is a little narrower, and it's also right next to the material settings. So these first 4 lines of ribbons are intended to be RGB tinted. There's a pretty much just a straight up ribbon texture. There's one that's got a little houndstooth pattern on it. There's one that's got little skulls in it, and then there's one that's kind of got a gothy floral kind of overlay on it. I offered them all the way from almost black to almost white because it actually works a little bit different than if you were to just tint a darker red. It looks different over, you know, say the light skull texture versus the medium skull texture. I just wanted to give you as many options as possible. Plus, I've also got some that don't really look like ribbons. These look kind of like, you know, like a studded leather strap. And there's a red, a pink, a purple, a blue, a green, and a gray. And also there's 2 diamonds. There's one silver and there's one that's gold. And then there's a square silver and a square gold. So that makes up that assortment there. And then on these rainbow ribbons, there's the brightly colored rainbow ribbon. I gotta click apply or it doesn't do anything. And then there's also one that's more pastel. So that you can make it lighter. Also, it's worth noting that the pastel one can be a little interesting if you tint it with colors, because it still has a little bit of a spectrum to it. You see, even though it's tinting greens and yellows, you're still just getting kind of a pink to purple there. So that opens up a lot of options there too. But the difference across the way here is that these different ribbons have got these little thin filaments of the metal texture colors here, and they actually match these metals. The specular map and the bump map should make them look like they stand out a little bit too. So that's why there are 6 choices on the ribbons there. Horns, got all a bunch of grayscale stuff so that you can RGB tint it, again with the dark to light for kind of the same kinds of reasons. Light, if I just tint it dark, you're never going to get the kind of contrast that you get out of the medium and the darker textures. You'll also see that some of them have the black tip and some don't. See, this is just a white, kind of a serpentine looking scaly texture. In the light you'd be able to see it better, but I'll show you some of that in a minute. Whereas if I go with this one here, it's got the faded black tip on it. Same thing with all of the other ones. And like I said, we have kind of a serpentine. We've got one that looks kind of like a rough, rocky, or ashy surface. This one is a little bit different, but it's another rough, stony kind of texture. This one looks like dry, cracked mud almost, or aged, scratched something. This one has kind of a sleek texture that it's very uniform. We've got one that is just kind of smooth, although with the materials there are details that you can see, like this little kind of ridge thing is actually in the materials. And then the last one is another, you know, kind of rough, bumpy horn texture. And these are all RGB tintable, so you can mix and match all kinds of crazy stuff. Some stuff will stand out better on a dark texture than it does on a light texture, so depending on what you want to do with your effects, that may change what color you want the horns to be. And speaking of the effects, by default it's got this blood kind of splattered on the inside of the horns. And I've got materials turned on. I'm in love with materials all over again, so the blood really does look kind of thick and wet. I think it looks pretty cool. There's a couple of other bloods. That one's splattered on the inside of the curve. You can see here. It is worth noting that materials don't show on HUD, so it doesn't look quite the same that it does, but it is representative. This one here, blood 2, has got the blood kind of splattered all around the outside of the horn. And then there's an end where it's splattered on the end, and then there's another one where it's splattered from the base of the horn. I do also have just general tintable fluid textures in here, so you could tint that whatever color you want. Knowing some of my centers, I'm sure you won't tint it at all for obvious reasons. But if you wanted to have you know, some kind of weird glowing green radiation goo or something splattered on your horn, you could do that. You know, or whatever color you want. Anything that you can imagine and pick, you can assign to your materials. Now, some of these are animated. Let's put the default flames on here. You can see that also when you apply the effects layers, you get some materials changes that load automatically. Like when I chose the flames, that sets full bright on. It sets glow to 25, and it actually set gloss and environment to 0 on the materials, so that you would get something that goes along really well with the flames. Like on the blood, it turns the bright off and it gives you a gloss and an environmental value. It turns the glow off. This one here is a magma. You can thank Brian for the lava / magma textures, because he only cried about them forever because he wanted them carried over from the old horns. On this one, you can see it also set the emissive glow, which is the masking option that lets glow just affect certain parts of the texture. And you can see that the speed at which the magma moves is slower than the speed at which the flames move. There's another magma here that's a little brighter, higher contrast, and actually moves ever so slightly faster. We've also got a whole bunch of tintable special effects here. This is the same as the flames texture, except it's white, so that you can tint it whatever color you want. If you want purple flames, you can have purple flames. Now the RGB ones don't reset the RGB tint, because if you've got a tint that you like and you just want to see how it looks with different effects layers, it keeps those. And this one's kind of a cracked deal where the horns are cracked open around, you know, whatever you imagine that might be. Maybe it's energy or something that's poison that's seeping out of your horns. Be whatever you want it to be. These are kind of a vent kind of thing. Just kind of looks like you got a glow going that's seeping out of the serrations on the horns. And again, these can be any color that you want them to be. You know, that takes us back to that kind of fiery lava look with that orange. We've got, you know, lots and lots of these energy, plasma, ghostly looking textures. I won't burn the whole video up touching on all of these, but and some of them move different ways. And at different speeds, you know, so you've got a lot of effects to choose from. Some of them, the alpha may be set a little bit lower, but once you've selected an effect here, you can change any of this stuff any way you want. Like I could totally set the alpha, and I may as well show you how to do that. When you click that button, you get a pop-up, and you just put your alpha value in and submit it, changes it there. Or of course you can use the arrows to adjust it one click at a time if you're fine-tuning something. As you can see here, I took alpha from 50 to 100. That makes it more solid. You do the same thing with the glow. You can make it glow more brightly if you wanted to. And so we got the blood. One of the other ones that I'm really fond of are these ice textures. These are really great if you've got materials enabled, because not only do you get the icy look and texture, but the materials are different in the light, and it really makes it look more like ice. Let me change my wind light settings here so you can see it a little more vividly. See, you got all of the cool icy looking reflections. And it is translucent just a bit, so you can get a hint of what's on the horns underneath it, but it's not real visible. If you really want to be able to see the horns while you got some ice stuff going, I have an iced ends effect option there. And you can see, I got my dark rocky horns that kind of freeze over to this glossy, icy look on the tips of them there. And if you saw the sample pictures that I was posting on Facebook or into Discord, or even into the group in Second Life, you'll see I use this particular effect in a lot of other ways on those images. Like if I wanted to have, my black horns fade to a slick red, I could do that by just tinting the ice red, because it's white enough that it carries it off really well. And if you didn't want it to be shiny, you could always come down here and click on the gloss and set that to 0, and then click on the environment and set that to 0 too, and then reapply it. And you've got a more of a flat texture, so you can do whatever you want with that as far as the shine goes. Just to show those last two, since they're different from everything else, we've got a kind of a runes effect that kind of scrolls around the serrations on the horn, and then I've also got another runes that is static, that kind of look like they're embossed on the horns with materials. They're not real legible because they're runes, but they stand out. They look pretty cool, especially with some contrasted texture options. Alright, so now I'm going to turn the effects layer off the same way you turn anything else off. You just click and hold, and it toggles off, and that goes completely away to eliminate confusion. I'm going to go back to horns here and just tool with this just a minute. One of my favorites is actually this medium serration. And I really like the way the materials play on the serpentine look and textures. It really looks 3D to me. I really enjoy that one a lot. Another one that I really like is the cracked one. Looks really cool, and you, again, in those pictures you would have seen that I used that one a number of times too. To me it looks a lot like an aged bone, which seems very appropriate for horns. And even with leather straps being an option, I know that not everybody is going to want ribbons. So of course, if you decide you don't want to show the ribbons, you can just toggle those off too. Go to our jewels, and like I was saying before, you can change all of them with one click to a different color, or you can come back in here and you can change them all to different colors, get all kinds of crazy rainbow stuff going on, and every single one of them is independent. Also, in addition to every single one of them being independent, you can also change the different horns independently. Like right now they were both changing, but if I went back up to horns here, for instance, and pick another crazy color for my left horn here, you see it only applied to the left one. The right one didn't change. Now what I actually expect to see people do with that is, one of my cam skills failed today, is do some domino type stuff where they might, you know, have a white horn on one side and a dark horn on the other side. And you could do the same thing with the jewelry. You could invert it. You could make all the chains silver over here, and you could come back to the left side and you could make all of the metals a darker color, kind of a metallic black. And then of course you'd want to flip back and do the opposite on the gems maybe. So you got a white horn with dark chains, and maybe you want white gems on the left side. And then on the right side you'd want black gems to go with your silver chains. See, there's those changes. There's those changes. Now something that is worth noting here is this is actually why I included the reset display, because you saw that I kind of mixed up the way that I made these changes, and now the representation on the HUD doesn't really match either horn, because I've got the dark metal chains that I used on this side, and I've got the black horn and the black gems that I used on the other side. So if you wanted to reset your display to match this horn here, then you could set your gems to white, and you could set your horn to the white horn texture, and then you could reset your display. It'll pop up and ask you, you sure you want to reset the display? It'll make all the hidden decor on the display visible, and you can say do it, and it reset the display. It didn't actually do anything to the horns because I had those toggled. I had the sync warn toggled off. If I had had it toggled on, it would set both the horns to all of these values. Now you'll also notice that I turned back on my effects and my ribbons. Well, and that's because by default everything is on the display. So when it does a reset, it wants to turn all that stuff back on. So let's go back to ribbons here, and we'll turn the ribbon. Oh, I gotta click on it to turn it off. You can't click on the horn for that. So that's pretty much the displays and the surfaces. The way all these controls went down here work, pretty self-explanatory. You've got plus and minus buttons for your RGB fine-tuning. You can make something black or reset it to white with a single click. If you click in here, you can use this bar to adjust how light or dark it is, and it adjusts it on the active RGB tint thing. And be a little patient with it, because when it does a refresh, it has to check a bunch of settings to make sure it's refreshed. It usually catches all the clicks, so even if you're a little bit faster than it is, it'll catch up with you. Bright is a toggle. Shine is a cycle. Now, this is classic shine. This is if you don't have materials on and you want to make something shiny. I might add that shine just doesn't look like materials does. Let's see, I turned it back off. I'm going to assign it. You see that shine doesn't pick up any of the details in the normal map, whereas if you turn materials on, that's kind of hard to see on this light texture. But the figures, I should have made it darker from the get-go. The materials reflect more differently when you use them versus the shine, and it becomes more obvious if I crank up the material settings. There you go. You can see it, especially right here. The little ridges really look like they stand out, whereas you're never going to get that kind of effect with the shine. Gloss and environment, those are both just like on your edit window, there's 0 to 255. The shinier you make it, the shinier it's going to be. If you go all the way maxed out to 255, you get something that looks kind of metallic and overwhelming. So usually you don't want to crank that environment all the way up to 255, because it's just, although in some cases maybe that's exactly what you want to do. If you want it to look glassy, that would certainly be viable. The interesting thing with materials is that even if you tint it all the way black and you can't see any of the texture, you can still get some of the detail from the materials in the lighting. Alright, so let's just reset my display again, and this time I'm going to go ahead and sync warn. And it'll go through and it quickly changes everything back to my active settings. That's going to be all of the defaults when it comes to ribbons. And I know that it seems a little slow, but the HUD does run faster than the horns do. There they are. Now if I wanted to, say, return everything to the original state that I originally got them, I could click on the Sinful logo here. You get a pop-up, and you can reset your HUD. It'll ask you, you sure you want to do that? You tell it yes, and it resets the HUD, restores all of the original indexing. You can see here all the original textures are there. It restores all of the RGBs and the materials. Now it didn't actually change the display. That's totally intentional. It did turn off my pose because I had to reestablish permissions. Let's turn that back on. But now that I've restored all of the original settings, I can hit reset display. Oops, let's see. Let me cancel that. I'm going to sync warn because I want to return the horns to original state too. And then click reset display and do it. And you see it runs through the whole gamut there. Resets everything to the way they were out of the box. Changes, and you see right here it goes to the other side of the horns, changes stuff and comes back. And your horns run slightly behind the HUD, but changes are still happening over here. So just be a little bit patient with us when you make sudden changes all at once, and there, the ribbons last. So now everything's back to the way it was out of the bag, and you're free to go wild with a brand new set of settings. Let me show you the mesh panel here so that you can see how fitting is done. This is very much like the PSR panel on the old A4, A5 HUDs. Position, scale, and rotation. Does pretty much the same thing. It's also just like what you see on the eyes HUD. Didn't have one on the bento tones because they're rigged, of course. I did lock out two of the rotation angles on these because of all this hanging jewelry. If you start rotating on the X or the Y axis front to back, then the chain looks all stupid because it's not hanging right. So I turned that off. But the Z axis rotation works fine. So if you want your horns to stand out a little wider, like I actually generally do with these, and you can make them bigger. I'm oversized. I tend to like things big. And then you can adjust the position, and for these, apart and together, adjust the width of the horn. You've got up and down, obviously, and then you got front to back too. So you can push these more back out of your face if you need to. If you want to clear any of that, you can clear it. Like if I wanted to clear the scale, I'll just click the red X here. If I wanted to clear the rotation, I click there. If I want to click the position, click there. If you find that the increments are too small for your taste and you want to, say, scale it up much faster than 10%, which is what 0.1 is, click on the increment. We've got a pop-up window. You can put a new value in there, like let's say I want to make it 25%, I put in 0.25. And now if I click large, it gets much bigger, much more quickly. And if you've got a big old giant dragon or something, that might be more useful to you. For most people, 10% per click is going to be adequate. Also, I do have support 3-axis resizing on here. So if I say only wanted to make these wider, let's see, make sure I'm not fooling myself. I believe that should be the y-axis. Yeah, that makes them wider, which could give you some different options as far as shape goes. You could make them, oh no, I did have it backwards. Y is front to back, and then it figures. That makes them longer. Wider would be X, which I should have known. But there you go. Anyway, that gives you other shape options that you might not have. Now, when you clear with the X here, though, it does clear any resizing. So if, you know, if I made them wider and then came out here and turned everything back on and then also made them bigger, when I click the X, it clears all of it. It clears the extra width and it clears the extra scale that I added. Same thing's going to be true on the other clears. So let's see. I think the only other things that I haven't covered are in the HUD header. I said you saw the menu. Click the Simple Needs button, you get a menu. You can reset your horns attachment from here. Resetting it doesn't change the textures, ask for confirmation, but it does reset the position, the scale, and the rotation. So it does restore those to exactly where they were when you first unpacked them. It resets the scripts in there. So I don't know, if you find that your horns are doing something weird, you could always try resetting it that way. There's only two scripts in the horns. There's the horn script that does all of the work, and then there's the Casper update script. While I'm in this edit window, I'll just tell you that if you really want to go bare minimum on your scripts, you could always pop in here and delete the Casper update script. Although Casper writes such clean scripts that things use practically no script time anyway, so there's not a huge point to that. But that's in there so that when you wear the horns, it will ping the server when you first put them on and see if there's been an update. If there has been, then you'll have the new ones sent to you, so that you don't have to fuss with trying to figure out, do I have the newest version or not. Let's see, also up here in the header, so we have the right and left buttons. We also have the HUD resize buttons. You saw those. We can make it smaller if we want. We can make it bigger if we want. We can restore it to the original size. We can minimize it by clicking on the minus, and then it leaves you a little icon down here, and you can click on that to open it back up. The question mark is your help button, and it'll ask you, do you want a note card or do you want to go to the web page? I'm still finishing up the note card because it still needs a video tutorial link. I wonder what I'm doing right now. And or you can click the web page and it'll take you to the page on the Simple Needs website that'll have the same information as the note card, along with the direct nested video and some images as well. I haven't got that set up where I'd show you, but that'll be available up there in the menu. And then of course if you click the X, it detaches the HUD altogether and gets it off your screen. Minimizing will be great while you're adjusting them, but when you're done adjusting them, you don't need to wear the HUD for anything. The only thing that the HUD's doing when you're not changing stuff is controlling this poser, and I'm sure you don't want to stand like a statue all day. So that should be pretty much everything. The way that I got these rigged up in Blender, I'm hoping to be able to crank out some other shapes of horns. Here in next week, I'll be able to get the next set out. I'm going to wrap up this video, and then I'm going to go and finish packaging these things and get them in the store. So maybe by the time YouTube's processing the video, you'll be able to buy these. Anyway, thank you for joining me for another tutorial video. Hopefully I didn't bore you to tears. Stay sinful, and I'll see you next time.